Safety observations is the next topic in the Behavioral-Based Safety Learning Unit. The objectives are to understand the value of a scheduled safety observation or evaluation and to develop methods that positively influence workers towards using safe behaviors all the time without having to be prompted. So what is a behavior-based safety observation? Well, it's an integral part of any modern safety and health program. And even if you don't have a modern safety and health program, a safety observation can be used in many different ways to help you achieve your goals. It helps you to recognize how incidents may be influenced by behaviors and develop methods to eliminate unsafe practices through updating standard operating procedures or job hazard analysis, to provide training, to build trust, to have awareness in what is going on and what is the potential for injury or where the potentials for injuries are. Generally speaking, it takes a long time for a company to have a really highly developed behavioral-based safety program. And so this is one of those methods that can be used to develop or grow your culture, right? So we talked in other modules about the difference between climate and culture. Climate's what's going on right now. People are upbeat, the company's doing well, we're ahead on production, versus a different climate where people are running overtime because somebody's been injured, the company isn't doing very well. And so that's climate. It changes throughout the course of a season. It changes throughout the course of a day or a week. But culture is the underlying values and beliefs that are put into place. And we really want to influence our culture, because if we can do that, then we can influence our climate. Well, that looks like a train wreck. That's just an accident waiting to happen. Somebody should probably do something about that. Pretty reactive approach to safety and health. And we're trying to move from this reactive approach to this proactive approach. Yes, somebody should do something about that. Let's do something about that right now. So why is it important to implement safety observations? And these are scheduled safety observations. And they really can be used to help build your job safety analysis. But safety may not be first in your company, and maybe it shouldn't be first. Maybe it should be second or third or fourth. As long as it's part of the discussion, as long as it's a line item, something that's accepted by management, then you're doing the best you can to continually improve the process and put fixes in place. Let's face it, safety isn't always the top priority. The top priority is usually getting the work done, because we all need to stay employed. Behavior-based safety programs aren't another program. It's just an addition to your program. Something else that you do within the safety and health program in which you work to help raise that awareness and have people behave safely and recognize their role. And it takes some time to build that culture. You kind of build it from the inside out, right? Instead of your climate, which is from the outside in. And ultimately, anything that helps reduce your injury and illnesses will reduce your costs associated with it. I find it's most beneficial to identify the gaps and then use that to develop training or awareness or tailgate safety meetings or something to enhance the way people are looking at the way they do their job. Quite often, folks don't want to get hurt. Management doesn't want people to get hurt. But we become blinded by what we do every day, and we don't really see the risks that are associated with it. And some industries just perform better than others. Now, you've probably seen this before. This is Heinrich's pyramid. The numbers have been done many different ways. This just happened to be the pyramid that is in the Bauer book, Safety and Health for Engineers, and I really enjoy that text. But for every 300,000 safety observations, you're probably going to observe 300 near hits. something that almost happened but didn't. There wasn't an injury, there wasn't a fatality, of course, because there'd have to be an injury to be a fatality. But there wasn't damage to a facility or damage to the environment. It's like you're driving down the road and a deer jumps out and you skid and you slam on the brakes, but you don't hit anything. And we'd call this kind of a near hit, because it wasn't a near miss, it was a near hit, or an incident. And for your 300,000 observations, you're going to see 30 minor accidents. Again, using the deer analogy, you hit the deer, but you're still able to drive away with under $500 worth of damage. And wouldn't that all be sweet when we live in these western states? And finally, again, for our 300,000 observations, there's going to be one serious accident or one fatality. And so this just reminds us that the more we keep our eyes open and we evaluate what we're doing and we make small corrections, the less likely we are to have that major event. So safety observations can be mandatory or they cannot be mandatory, but they are definitely scheduled. It's not part of a walk around and we just happen to see something. So we do our evaluation and then we put some kind of action plan in place. And usually that's measured against our key performance indicators. So we create our action plan. And finally, we showcase our results, which we share what we find with the workers, with management, so we can implement change if it needs to occur. So what are our key performance indicators? Well, that's something that you're going to have to develop or your management develops over time. And another way to look at it are the development of SMART goals or SMART indicators. And that means it's something that we can effectively use in our safety management program or our safety management database. So it needs to be very specific. It can't be broad-based. Improve safety. Well, that doesn't really mean anything, right? Have people behave safely. It doesn't really mean anything either. So what do we need to accomplish? So we need to reduce our injury and illness rates by 50% within the next year. It's very specific. And who is responsible for that? Is it the frontline leaders? Is it the managers? Is it everybody within the organization? And if it is, what's their key role? And what steps is each person going to take? Now, we can't usually think that large in a big organization. A lot of times we can only think within our own realm. So we will, as safety and health professionals, conduct 5 safety observations in the next 12 months. We are responsible and we know what we want to accomplish. And so the steps that need to be taken is find the key jobs or tasks which would benefit from these and bring together our safety committee for discussion. And then make it measurable. So have your goal or your key performance indicator measurable so that you can quantify it. Now sometimes you can use qualitative measurements, but really management and the budget keepers like something to quantify, something with numbers behind it, so that we're decreasing the number of at-risk behaviors that we see by 10% within our 12-month period. When I was supporting a large aerospace manufacturer, for every injury or illness that was on the book from the year before, they wanted 10 safety incidents to be reported into the system. So if you had 5 incidents, now these aren't accidents, they're just incidents, then, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. If you had 5 recordable injuries, each one of them should have 10 safety incidents paired to it. And not that specific one. It just means that we would have 50 incidents added into our system within the next year. And it was a way that we're trying to use that pyramid to say we have to do a whole bunch of observations before we could kind of get to the crux of the matter, what's going on. So SMART, specific, measurable, achievable. Is it something that we can actually achieve? And are we focused on those positive results, upping our game, ensuring that everyone's wearing their personal protective equipment every day? Is it relevant? Does it create an opportunity for two-way feedback and positive reinforcement? Is it something that everybody can buy into? And then again, we want to make these time bound. So what's our goal that we're going to accomplish specifically? How will we measure it? And in what period of time do we have to achieve this specific goal? So I'm giving you a couple of steps for the safety observations. You may do it a different way based on the safety management system program that you're using or what's provided to you from your insurance company. So it's somewhat generic, but steps are basically the same. So safety managers need to provide some training on what's going to be observed, when, and how often. And we have to have these workers very comfortable with us going out there and observing them while they work. And the more you're the boots on the ground safety and health professional, the easier this will be. The observation needs to inform the observed staff members that they're being watched, of course, because it's programmed, it's part of a priority. It's not going around and seeing somebody do something offhand and writing it down, right? We want them to do their job in the safest manner they possibly can. And then we make an indicator, whether that's on some kind of scale, 1 to 10, 1 to 5, or just safe, unsafe, safe, at risk. But we have to somehow grade what they're doing. And this is where that job hazard analysis is so valuable. Because if you have all the steps, you could write down whether they're within the boundaries of the steps. And something that I found when I was supporting the Department of the Navy was these evaluations would help us see how it was impossible to do it within the standard operating procedure. So some of the things you might be looking at are body position, personal protective equipment, tools and equipment, work environments, and again, procedures. And so we're trying to lead by example, demonstrating care and visibility, that we have zero tolerance for unsafe conditions, and there's no exceptions to these rules, that we're going to help guide people to do the right thing, because we would like zero harm, and we're going to prevent injury and illnesses, damages, or any other kind of loss to our business, because it costs our business money and we want our businesses to be making money. And that we're trying to, at the end of the day, have safe production within the constraints that our business is telling us, as well as within the constraints that the human can actually perform. Remember that sample behaviors and conditions and not individuals. So we're going to sample behaviors and conditions, but not the individuals themselves, even though we're watching the individuals. Planned task observation is a process where a task is specifically observed to enable the observer to know whether all aspects are safe. Actions outside the SOP or those that are considered at risk are identified. You judge the actions with the same criteria you'd use for yourself, considering both the internal and the external factors. And so the goal is based on positive engagement, so that full compliance is acknowledged. That means that the individual, as much as possible, is following the SOP or the JSA, really the SOP, within the JSA, right? Because the job safety analysis is based on the standard operating procedure. And that all the shortfalls, all the places where either the individual could not meet the SOP or the SOP wasn't clear enough, are rectified. And the changes are based on mutual decisions that are made in accordance with maybe a law, a regulation, a procedure within your company, or again, what the individuals can actually achieve. And maybe that's where a new tool needs to be developed, or some additional time, or another person put on the task. And you're able to kind of tease this out in a process that's unbiased and in a sense, non-judgmental. Although you're judging whether the process is safe or at risk, it's not an individual saying, I can't do this. It's a person or a group of people basing it off of some set criteria. And this really can be seen as a leading indicator instead of a lagging indicator to identify what those influences are that are causing people to use unsafe behaviors, right? All of safety and health is about behaviors, truly. So you focus on the behaviors and the conditions. You don't press blame or say Joe did this. The process is for people, so it involves everybody, the supervisor as well as the worker doing the job, and maybe somebody in quality control who has to go back and evaluate whether the widget that was made was actually done appropriately. It gives positive reinforcements for those safe behaviors and can be used as this leading indicator, which is statistically driven, right? We want it measurable and time bound. And unlike our lost work days or our DART rates, which are lagging indicators. So we've chosen our task and we have our form. When we're doing our observations after we complete our form, we have our supervisor review them if they're not part of the process within itself, right? So usually your supervisor isn't doing the safety observations. It would be you as a safety and health professional. That doesn't mean that they can't, just as long as they're trained to do so. It's really interesting when you have somebody switch roles. So maybe a supervisor in the welding shop is now going to do the safety evaluation for the fabrication shop. We become really blind to things that we're close to. So any behaviors that present an immediate danger to life or health of the worker or the environment have to be stopped immediately and discussed. Typically we don't find these, but we may find a tool with a missing guard or leads on a welding unit that are bare and can electrify a worker. You really never know what you're going to find out there, but typically we don't find these imminent hazards. At-risk behaviors create different kinds of action plans. We can just review them to make sure the best practice is being followed. You really can use it to create that learning content, a toolbox talk, or some kind of background information so somebody understands why, for example, the guard should be put into place. We can update our standard operating procedures and our job hazard analysis based on our behavioral-based safety observations. And then this also overall helps us manage our exposures based on what we see. Sometimes we're so busy as safety and health professionals we don't get a chance to watch an evolution of a task. And this gives us the opportunity to watch that evolution and see something from start to finish. So you want to provide positive reinforcement, identify error-like conditions, and also institutional weaknesses. This is something that across the board is a weakness within your organization. For example, you don't have a near miss or an incident reporting system, or your PMs aren't being done on time because of low personnel. And that's something that would be institutional-wise. You're actually gathering meaningful data, and you're working with management and the workers within themselves. So you're trying to move from lagging indicators, crisis reactions, safety stand-downs, OSHA logs, and lessons learned to being error tolerant, because you've put so many controls in place that maybe they can do the job one or two different ways. You have an incident or a near hit, near miss reporting system. You're using accident prevention instead of accident analysis. You have process improvements in place, and these become your leading indicators instead of your lagging indicators. So these key performance indicators can be really important. What goal are we trying to get to besides processing the widget on time? So a checklist is a checklist, right? Really, it's just a reminder of what you need to look for, but it also helps you do something in a logical fashion and ensures that two people who are performing the task in observation are looking at the same elements, as well as the same elements are being evaluated across tasks. One really interesting way to do this, if you have the manpower and the time, is to have two people evaluate the task at the same time, but not confer their results until they get back to the office. And then you can see whether your subjective analysis match. So you may be new to this and get your checklist off of the internet, or maybe it's been developed, but ensure that it meets the needs of the task you're evaluating as well as your organization as well. And that you are looking at equipment, staffing, and operational requirements. So, which tasks do you take a look at? Well, you could focus on your past injuries or your losses or ask ideas from the safety committee. Your safety committee might also be another resource to take a look at your checklist before you use it to ensure that everything's being considered. You can also look at your safety program itself. So, for example, if you have a lockout tagout program, that may be an excellent task to observe whether people are actually following the procedures. Even though your lockout tagout procedures are supposed to be reviewed and observed every year, chances are they're probably not. Consider all the senses that are being used, whether it's something people see, do they smell it, do they touch it, do they hear it, and stick to a routine, which means be really rigorous in your checklist and how it's being used. And it might involve you and another individual sitting down and cross-training one another if two of you are going to be using this to make sure that you're both on the same page or using the same playing field, whichever kind of analogy you like to use. Consider the OSHA standards as well as standards from other industries, whether they're consensus standards from the National Fire Association or it's a consensus standard that's being used in a welding operation. Does your safety observation checklist help you align with your key performance indicators? What are you measuring? How are you measuring it? And when is it being measured? You can also request input from workers who'll be doing the job to take a look at that checklist and to help you determine which jobs they feel can be improved from having a safety observation. Review your checklists regularly and organize it in a manner that best works for you and the process that's going to be looked upon. You can build your checklist from your input from your workers, or you can start with the checklist and just modify a checklist based on input from your work staff, your safety committee, other safety and health professionals. Be sure to set how often you're going to perform your safety observations or walkthroughs and stay on task. Work environments and hazards vary greatly, so the frequency that makes most sense for your organization, whether it be monthly, quarterly, or annually. You have to determine your schedule based on operational differences within a facility, because of regulatory requirements or how many ships operate, or because of past incidents or near misses that have occurred. So in all of this, we're talking about the human and human behavior. And there's just some principles we'll cover here to help us understand human behavior. It's hard sometimes to take a look at ourselves and or take a look at others and really recognize why people make mistakes. But people are fallible. Even the best intentions, people make mistakes for very different reasons or errors of omission or commission. Error-likely situations are predictable, manageable, and preventable, and this is true if we're able to analyze them. We do this in human factors, and our safety observations will help us do that, will help us identify some of these error-likely situations. Individual behavior is influenced by the organizational process and its values, right? So our individual behavior, especially our safety behavior, is influenced by that culture, right? That's part of that organizational underlying tone or toe that gets a hold of us. People tend to achieve high levels of performance based largely on encouragement and reinforcement received from leaders, peers, and subordinates. So, and that's also true that people are likely to fail for the same reason, largely based on what we see others do, right, and who we run with, so to speak. And building a behavioral-based safety program is something that takes a lot of energy from the safety and health professional until they're able to bring management, senior leadership, management, and frontline supervisors on board. And then everybody's kind of rowing the boat in the same direction, and it becomes much easier to influence behavior. Events can typically be avoided if we understand the reasons that the event occurred and learn from this past event. And again, this is something that we're doing kind of in retrospect, but we can still use it. That's where they always say hindsight is 20/20 or hindsight is best. It's so easy to see what we should have done, but sometimes it's hard to see in the moment what we're doing, whether it's right or whether it's wrong. So excuse me. So industry statistics on the cause of unpleasant events, right? 90% of it's due to human error or human action or inaction, and 10% is due to equipment failure. So when we take a look at that 90%, we can see that 70% of this is system-based. And I always call this as process-based errors. So the system is so flawed that the human has very little chance of success. And one thing that used to happen all the time, if you've ever changed a phone, like you went from an Android to an iPhone or an iPhone to an Android, or maybe the first time you ever used a BlackBerry, and you kept hanging up on somebody when they called instead of answering it, and it was because it didn't meet that mental model, and the phone itself was causing that error because it was not laid out in the same way that you were used to, right? So it's like machine-induced errors. And not that the phone was causing it, but if all phones operated the same way, there'd be less likelihood of error. And it is one of the reasons why when pieces of equipment are purchased, it is highly recommended that you purchase the same type of equipment where the controls operate in the same way. It helps to reduce the likelihood that somebody's going to make a mistake. So what happens when things go wrong? And this is called the bad apple theory. There's lots of different ways of looking at it. So this is the way we don't want to look at it. Human error is the cause of accidents. You're highly trained, and if you did what you trained, then you wouldn't make a mistake, and you weren't careful enough, so we should punish you. So this is like the lone gunman. It focuses on one cause of the incident, and it was that one human. When we know that there's definitely a root cause or an underlying cause, right? So that's the bad apple theory. Instead, we should be looking at it as human error is a symptom of trouble deeper within the system. What is the root cause of the problem? Is it something manager or operational that's put into place? Is the senior leader going out there without their safety glasses and in flip-flops, and therefore we expect the employees to do the same? We are human and we make mistakes, so let's explore ways in which we could error-proof the system. At-risk behavior is usually a trigger and not a cause. So again, it's important to acknowledge that when we say people often perform at-risk behaviors, either unconsciously, incompletely, or consciously, we are not suggesting that people are reckless or careless in any way. There's awful things within the larger system that encourages them or allows them to necessitate that at-risk behavior. If an individual hasn't had appropriate training, they are likely to perform an at-risk behavior without even understanding it or realizing it. If a procedure is unclear or complex, an individual may easily skip a step without realizing that they've done so. If an individual needs a ladder that is not conveniently located, they may elect to stand on a chair or something like that, or use a handrail because it's just easier to do, or they don't know where to get the equipment. If an individual is constantly yelled at for asking questions, then they're not going to move. Then they're not going to ask questions anymore. And so those good attempts by the individual to perform the task appropriately has to be encouraged. I was in a safety stand-down meeting one time, and a worker talked about they felt, even though they were bringing the traffic speeds down to 40 miles an hour, that they should still be in ANSI Class 3 vests. And the supervisor just snapped at him and told him why that wasn't necessary and how much money it was going to cost, which wasn't all that much. And I could see that person shut down and probably pretty unlikely to make a suggestion again. And we have to understand that people are under time constraints and pressures to produce work in a certain period of time, but sometimes a little coaching or education could go a long way. So we know there's situations where risky behavior needs to be changed, and remember that it takes time to make those changes. But an example would be if there's really heavy boxes which need to be lifted, and we can't always have manual materials handling equipment put in place, can we be certain that 2 people are always on the job, or that things are delivered in lighter boxes, and then we don't have those manual materials handling risks? So it's better to do it than to say it. So walk the talk, model safety, and hopefully encourage your senior leadership to do the same. Some employees need to be directed to work safety, and the way they're directed is in what they see and what they believe leadership prefers for them to do. What if it is really the act of leading ourselves? Most people see leadership as the act of leading others. So we have an intent, and our behavior affects that intent in what we do. And if we make an adjustment, small adjustments over a period of time, like our lean engineering ourselves, we can help change ourselves. And then once we are the model of safety, and we can help our management be the model of safety, it's a lot easier to have our workers be the model of safety, to make those right choices and not have it pushed down upon them. Now, the next couple of slides show a number of safety inspections, observational checklists that you can use. I threw them out there just so you can see the different ones that are available to you. I really like the ones that enable us to put a comment field in there, as well as our web base, so we could maybe take the picture and fill it in all at one time if you're doing it on a tablet. And then you can summarize the hazard and what needs to be corrected and what your short-term and your long-term corrected is. Working for the Department of Labor, we do this a lot after we're done with one of our consultation visits. We line item out the hazards, what the OSHA rule is against them, what the immediate and long-term control is, and this empowers the worker, empowers the employer to make changes as they can and to have some kind of guide along with that. And here's one that was started to be filled out.